I bought a VR headset a while ago. At the time, it didn't feel like I was buying a device. It felt closer to adding something to my life that had been missing. Or maybe something I hadn't made space for yet, but could easily imagine fitting in. I could already see when I'd use it, what it would replace, how it would quietly become part of my routine. That part happens very easily. Maybe too easily. And to be fair, I did use it in the beginning. It wasn't one of those things that immediately fell apart or disappointed me. It worked exactly the way I expected it to. The shift showed up later, and it's subtle enough that you don't really notice when it happens. Using it started to require a bit of setup, then a bit of intention, and eventually it became something I had to actively choose, rather than something I drifted toward without thinking. Once that happens, something changes, even if nothing about the product itself does. I think that's what I keep missing in the moment. There are objects you fall into using without noticing, and then there are objects that sit there waiting for you to become the version of yourself who uses them regularly. And for a short period, that version of you actually exists. Or at least it feels like it does. Long enough to make the purchase feel completely justified. I've had a few versions of this. A 3D printer that made perfect sense when I thought about all the things it could do, all the small problems it could solve if I just got into the habit of using it. I remember imagining printing small fixes for things around the house, parts I didn't have yet, problems I didn't actually have either. A small analog synth that felt like it would open up a different kind of creative space, something more tactile, something separate from a screen. I pictured it sitting on the desk already in use. In both cases, the reasoning held up. I understood what they were for. I knew their limitations. I had already spent enough time watching other people use them to feel like I wasn't guessing. Which, in hindsight, might be part of the problem. That's where this gets a bit confusing, because it doesn't feel like impulse buying in the obvious sense. There's no randomness to it. It's slower, more informed, almost careful. You spend time with the idea before you spend money on it, or you think you do. And a lot of that time is shaped by reviews. You watch someone explain how it holds up over time, then someone else compares it to alternatives, then someone else points out the trade-offs in a way that feels balanced and reasonable. After a while, you don't just know what the object does, you start to feel like you understand where it fits and who it's for. That feeling is convincing. It feels like clarity, or something close to it. But understanding something like that doesn't really answer the question that ends up mattering. It tells you what the object is like. It doesn't tell you what your days actually look like once it's there. So I started doing something simple. If I want to buy something, I leave it alone for 2 days. I don't track it anywhere or turn it into a rule. It's more like introducing a bit of distance between the moment something makes sense and the moment I can act on it. Just enough space for the initial version of the idea to settle a bit. And what's been interesting is how often that distance changes things. Sometimes I come back to it and it already feels thinner, like most of what made it convincing was tied to a very specific moment. Maybe even the video I had just watched. Other times it's still there, but it's less urgent. Less loaded. When it does stay, it feels different. It's harder to point to exactly what changed, but it's less about excitement and more about a kind of quiet compatibility. Those are usually the things I end up buying. And when I look at those things later, they follow a pattern that's not obvious when you're deciding. They don't really announce themselves. They don't require much from me. They just slide into whatever I'm already doing. An ergonomic chair that disappears the moment I sit down. An espresso machine that becomes part of the morning, even on days when I'm not really paying attention. A guitar that stays close enough that picking it up doesn't feel like starting something. It just happens sometimes. A watch that ends up on my wrist without any thought behind it. Clothes that I keep reaching for, even when there are other options right next to them. None of these felt particularly significant after the first few days. They didn't carry that strong sense of this was a great decision. They just stayed, which might be the more important part. And I think that's where some of the confusion around Buy It for Life comes from, because the idea itself holds up. There's real value in owning things that are well made, that don't need to be replaced, that can stay with you for a long time. I've experienced that. But durability doesn't seem to decide whether something becomes part of your life. You can own something for a long time and still never build any real relationship with it. It just exists around you. A bit like that headset sitting on a shelf. And this is the part that doesn't translate well through reviews or recommendations, even the good ones. They're very effective at evaluating objects. They can tell you what holds up, what breaks, what's worth the price, what isn't. They narrow things down in a way that's hard to argue with, but they can't account for the way your attention actually behaves. They don't see the small frictions that make you avoid something, or the small conveniences that make something else become automatic. Like the difference between something you have to set up and something that's already there when you reach for it. That layer stays mostly invisible. Once something feels well explained, it becomes easier to follow through with it. And that step, the one where you move from understanding to owning, starts to feel almost expected. I think what I'm slowly realizing is that the problem isn't really about finding better things to buy, or maybe that's only a small part of it. It's more about noticing which things actually survive once they're in your life. Which ones keep showing up even when you're not thinking about them. Because that seems to be the real filter, not whether something is good in general or whether it makes sense in theory, but whether it continues to exist in your routine without needing to be constantly chosen. I still get this wrong. There are still things around me that made perfect sense at the time and now feel slightly out of place. Things I can explain, but don't really use. But that small delay, just leaving the idea alone for a bit, seems to reveal something that all the research doesn't. It shows whether the interest was tied to a moment or whether it actually has somewhere to go. And I think about that VR headset sometimes. It's still technically a good product. It does everything it's supposed to do. Nothing about it failed. It just never found a place to live in my life. Or maybe I never made one for it. Anyway, if you've run into something similar, I'm curious how you think about it. And if you want more of this kind of thinking, you can subscribe. And I'll see you in the next one.